Hey guys, this is Jan for Chess24. Third round in the Grand Prix final in Khanty-Mansiysk in Siberia today. And as game of the day, I've chosen the encounter between Fabiano Caruana and Evgeny Tomashevsky. Caruana on 1 out of 2 before their game and Tomashevsky on 1.5 out of 2. But in the overall Grand Prix ranking, which consists of 4 tournaments, both these guys are leading the pack and are two of the favorites to qualify from the Grand Prix for the candidates tournament. So of course their direct encounter carries a lot of importance. And let's go there directly and see what happened. Caruana with the white pieces goes for 1 d4. I would thought of him as more of an e4 player, but he can do both, and he decided that he liked his chances better against Tomashevsky's d4 repertoire than against his e4 repertoire. d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight c3. And Tomashevsky repeats the line we saw him play in the first round against Badur Jubava, the move a6. Jubava played e3, c5, another main move, and Caruana chooses the third main option, I would say, the move a4. Directed against b5 and also against d takes c4, after which white could now go e4 and b5. Well, it's not bad, it's actually a complicated line, but can be met with takes, knight d5, and knight takes b5, exploiting the pin. So dc4 is not that popular. Instead, black plays e6, the main move, transposing to some kind of semi-Slav, where he's arguing having played a6 can be no worse for black than white's a4. However, things are never that simple, and there's some positions where a4 also favors white. Caruana goes for the move bishop to f4. Once again, not really the main move. Bishop g5 is a bit more popular in this position, so is g3. But I like the move bishop f4. I think I've played it myself a couple years back. On g5, the bishop is often in danger of being exchanged for its counterpart on e7 later. Let's say bishop g5, bishop e7, and then this knight moves to d7 or e4. While on f4, the bishop is a bit harder to get rid of. Well, bishop d6 is possible, but that early, it's not all that tempting, and white has the option of maintaining the tension here with the move e3. So after bishop f4, black has a couple of interesting options. D takes c4 is possible with the idea of e3 knight to d5, trying to get rid of this bishop. However, practice has shown that such a position tends to be better for white, believe it or not. It's doubled pawns and got rid of the two bishops, but the main factor is that the black bishop on c8 finds it very hard to enter the game. Another option is the sharp move c5 here, has also been played once in a while. But Tomashevsky, who's no stranger to this position, he had a game against Nakamura, amongst others, already played this, and he goes for the main move a5, fixing the white weakness on b4 on the queen side. Black, in general, wants to conclude his development by going knight a6, bishop e7, castles, oops. Let's do this again. Knight a6, bishop e7, castles, b6, bishop b7, and take it from there. Caruana plays e3, looks innocent enough, trying to develop his bishop as well. And Tomashevsky goes for bishop to e7, part of the plan I just mentioned. But this move order gives white an extra option, which I think should have been avoided. And maybe Tomashevsky was better advised to start with knight a6 in this position, stopping white's next move. Because after bishop e7, Caruana did not proceed developing with bishop e2 or bishop d3, which, by the way, would probably have been met by knight to h5, challenging this bishop. This is what Tomashevsky played against Nakamura. But instead, Caruana, who had of course seen this game, had prepared a very dangerous idea, the move g4. This looks a bit eccentric at first sight, but there have been crazier positions where white played g4, which nowadays has become quite mainstream in a lot of 1d4 openings. Some examples in the semi-Slav after queen c2, bishop d6, g4 has long been a main line. But even in quieter queen's gambit positions, for example, take this main line of the, whatever it's called. I really don't know what it's called. Bondarevsky? I'm not sure. Spassky played this a lot. Anyway, after b6, g4 is a move which was played by Grishuk against Peter Leko, amongst others. And even in the most dull of positions in this Lasker exchange variation, they have tried to spice it up by going g4 followed by h4 here. So g4s are quite common in even these quiet Queen's Gambit positions, and this seems to be a particularly good scenario to get it in after bishop e7, g4. The idea is often quite positional. White wants to gain space with g5 and make it a bit harder for black to castle kingside, because should black castle into this, he will be faced with a pawn storm that has already started, so it's a bit tougher to castle knowing that these pawns keep running towards your king. Black typically has three ways to react to this g4 move. One is to take it. Not a very good idea here. White would go rook g1, winning his pawn back on g7, either immediately when the knight moves or after, let's say, f5, h3, knight f6, rook g7. This position clearly favors white. The opening of the g file is in his favor. His rook is very active. Can't play like that. And that goes to show why bishop e7 allowed this option, while knight a6 wouldn't have. After knight a6, g4, black can just take, and after rook g1, retreat. And the bishop is still on f8, protecting this pawn. So back to g4, not a good idea to take. Another typical reaction is to play h6 to impede g5, at least for the moment. But I also don't like it here. White would probably play rook g1, and now castling into it looks more dangerous than ever, because whenever black castles, g5 will instantly open lines because of h6, and just looks very, very risky for black. So Tomaszewski goes for the third option, which is to ignore it. He does so by playing knight a6. I think with the new situation it was interesting to contemplate castles as well. Looks very dangerous castling into it and so on. But after g5, knight h5, bishop e5, I'm assuming this was the idea, you don't want to give up this bishop. Now this knight can go to d7, since it's not on a6 yet, and challenge the bishop on e5 with a quite complicated situation. I have no doubts Caruana analyzed this or something along these lines at home and liked it for white. So I wouldn't be surprised if white is better here and we're not gonna see black players lining up to play this position after, let's say, h4. But given the circumstances, I think this was worth considering instead of knight a6, which allows white to go along, to proceed with his idea. Just g5, knight d7, and h4. And we see it's not so much about checkmating, but more about gaining space and depriving the black pieces of their natural squares. The knight on f6 was very well positioned to fight for the center. Now it had to go to d7. It's not the end of the world, but it is a little unpleasant for black. There's all pieces and pawns still left on the board, and black just has a lot less space. So I think it's fair to say that Caruana won the opening discussion. Knight to b4, bishop to e2, b6. Tomaszewski delays castling and proceeds developing here. White goes h5, bishop to b7. Bishop a6 was also interesting, giving white a choice between c takes d5 and b3. b3 a little loosening. I'm not sure if Caruana would have played this. Bishop b7. Now Caruana decided it was a good time to release the tension in the center and take on d5 before black ever starts thinking about d takes c and c5 opening the position here. It's good timing to take on d5 now. C takes d is not really an option, just weakens this square too much, and after knight b5, this combination is a powerhouse and white is just much better. So it's between e takes d and knight takes d5. Tomaszewski mentioned knight takes d5 as maybe better at the press conference, but Caruana had his doubts, and I think he was right. After knight takes d5, e queen c2. Doesn't help black that much that these knights are exchanged. The knight on b4 was quite active after all. And it seems like white is a very pleasant position after bishop b4 check f1. I think Caruana is right that white was much better here. E takes d5 is a better bet, keeping these knights on the board. Queen d2, a nice quiet move, preparing long castles, and then maybe putting this rook on g1 and going g6. So Tomaszewski was not tempted to castle into it with short castles, probably just long castles, and black finds it surprisingly hard to get counterplay. c5 not only weakens this square, it also doesn't do that much. And b5, this would be typical, trying to open up the position against the king here. Since the pawn is on a4, seems a bit slow, and probably white just gets there first after rook g1. Let's say b takes a g6. The white attack does look very, very dangerous. So Tomaszewski wasn't tempted by any of this and decided to take drastic measures to play the move f5. The idea of this is that if now white castles and let's say black castles, well, white is still better arguably with all his extra space. It's a lot harder to open the king. g6 would be met with h6, and h6 would be met with g6. So it's very hard to open the position because the pawn is on f5 and no longer a target for the g-pawn. So Caruana decided to knock the pawn and take it. Interesting decision. I'm not sure it was the best decision, but it is certainly very consistent, opening up the position. G takes f. Tomaszewski took with the bishop. Knight takes f6, also possible. I decided to take with the bishop, which looks very natural. The next move I also find, I find it instructive. I'm not sure it's the best move, but it seems like these super strong players, they're very eager to get this thorn in the flesh installed. I was reading these Kasparov autobiography chess books recently, and I noticed that he was always extremely happy when he got his pawn to h6 or to h3 with white. And yeah, I don't know, it's something I felt like I've been underestimating in my games, because it always felt to me, yeah, this position is close, it's not going to be so easy to get to the king. But whenever the position opens later, this weakness of the g7 square will be a problem. Like queen g7 checkmate is always on the agenda much later, but it is an option, and it's interesting to see that both Kasparov and Caruana seem to be very content to get this h6. g6, and Caruana wastes no time, tries to open up the position here, spicing things up even further with a move e4. Could also have delayed it and castle first, then try to go king b1, rook g1 along these lines, when arguably is still a bit better, but the position remains very complicated. But he wants to strike while the iron is hot, open the position before black has brought his king into safety and developed all his pieces. Short castles, kind of forced now, since knight d6 was a threat. Long castles, once again, this king lacks protection, but is still surprisingly safe. But this was a key moment in the game, I believe. Tomaszewski decides to treat the position statically, positionally from here on, and it doesn't serve him well. He ends up in trouble, and this was his last chance to open the position and launch. Well, last chance is strong, but this was a key moment where he had the option to open the position and create counter chances by playing c5. Of course, both players considered this, but Tomaszewski didn't like it because of bishop c4 check, king h8 and d5, which looks very good for white, but here black has a key move, move b5, which Tomaszewski missed. And after that, it's by no means clear. Could very well be that black is quite okay here. Bishop takes b5 is met with bishop takes d5. All of a sudden, the black pieces are a bit more active, and the white king is starting to feel the heat a bit. So a takes b is logical, but now, well, black has the move bishop, knight to b6, trying to win his material back, but even stronger is a takes b, just ignoring everything and going a4, trying to create counterplay with a3. And this is extremely double-edged. Not sure who's better, and it becomes very, very complicated, and this is real counterplay with the pawn coming to a3. So the battle could have taken a very different course had Tomaszewski seized this chance, and that's why I said I'm not sure if objectively this g takes f, h6, e4 sequence was best, but it was all very consistent, and in the game it turned out well because Tomaszewski didn't go for this, went knight d5, bishop g3, bishop a6. All looks very logical. He put his knight on a good square, now he exchanges his passive bishop. But it turns out that once the position stabilizes, the main factor is still the weakness of the black king and the more active white pieces. Rook he1, rook a back to get nothing to do on a6. So this position is tough for black. King b1, taking a timeout, always useful to get out of this diagonal and out of the c-file. Bishop e7 back, all logical stuff. Queen d3, bishop e7 after all, threaten rook takes f3, and bishop to b4. So queen d3 comfortably parries both. Rook f5, once again logical positional play. He's intending to go queen f8, attacking h6 and f3. But it's white to move, and now Caruana strikes before black is fully developed, before queen f8 came and before this rook had a chance to enter the game. Goes knight to e5, and it's very hard to meet this. The obvious reaction would be knight takes e5, but then after d takes e5, it's very, very difficult to keep control for black. Queen c4 is in the air, knight c3 is in the air. This pawn is strong, can always advance, go e6, knight d6 is in the air. It's quite unpleasant. Queen f8 would probably be met by queen c4 attacking this pawn. Just hard to play this position. Queen c8 could be met with c3, similar to the game, or with e6, this was discussed by the players, or even queen c4. A lot of tempting options for white. And Tomaszewski didn't like it, so he decided to start with queen c8, covering c6 and keeping knight takes e5 in reserve. But once again, Caruana plays very strongly here and goes knight c3 in the same spirit, trying to open things up in the center and try to force concessions from black before he is fully developed. And it works. It's very hard to give black good advice here. Knight c3 was a very, very strong move. Knight takes c3, queen takes c3, knight takes e5. What else? c6 is hanging, bishop b4 does not help because of queen c4 check. So black, yeah, without making any obvious mistakes, really just missing this c5 chance, has ended up in serious trouble, which speaks to the strength of Caruana's position after the g4, g5 stuff. Oh, sorry, he didn't play d takes e5, which would have been a good move as well, but that at least allows black to go queen e6. Caruana mentioned he spent a long time calculating rook d6 here, and this also seems to be good for white, but it leads to very, very messy positions. Something like this. Probably white is better according to the computer he is, but anything can happen. So Caruana decided to play more clinical and found a very nice intermediate move, the move queen b3 check, taking the e6 square under control. The other point is that after knight f7, rook takes e7, white is just too active. Queen f8, for example, rook de1, queen takes h6, queen takes b6. The white pieces are superior, will start picking up pawns and using that this black king is still vulnerable to rook e8 checks. Position is just winning for white. So black couldn't play knight to f7, had to go rook f7. But now after de5, it's a different scenario because there's no longer queen e6, so this e-pawn is becoming extremely strong and hard to deal with. Black is in trouble. Queen f5 check, king a2, bishop to b4, and Caruana plays, as we learned in school, pushing his e-pawn as quickly as possible, e6, rook e7, and now fighting against the blocker with bishop h4, ignoring the attack on his own rook, because after bishop takes e1, bishop takes e7, this pawn would just become unstoppable. Bishop somewhere, e7, and game. So the rook had to move, rook back to e8, but the pawn just keeps advancing, e7 check, queen f7, rook to e6, and we see the effect of this guy. It just cuts the board in two and it restricts black's pieces tremendously. The queen has to stay here to control this diagonal. This rook has to stay in front of it, and black is just very passive, and white has many ways to strengthen his position. So all things together, black is just lost. Tomaszewski tries last chance, goes b5, trying to create at least a hint of counterplay with b takes a4. And Caruana said he panicked here. He was originally planning to go rook to g1 with the lethal threat of rook takes g6, but then he realized that after king h8 there's nothing concrete, and he had to devise something else, and he was very low on time, 20 seconds or something like that. So he played the move rook d8, which is very strong, even though he said it got too messy for his taste around here. But rook d8 does keep control. Another option would have been the move rook d4. I like this move a lot. It's very pretty and shows how dominant white's position is. B takes a4, queen c4, and there's nothing black can do against the threat of rook to f4, just finishing the game. Because this queen would be forced to leave its post, and then something very, very bad would happen on this diagonal. But nothing wrong with rook d8, b takes a4, queen to e3. Looks a bit scary because his rook is pinned, but the pawn on e7 is still the dominating factor in the position. If given a timeout, white would just play king to a1 and then go rook takes a8 followed by e8 winning. And there's not much black can do against this reasonably simple plan. For example, a3 would just be taken, bishop c5, queen e5, or queen e4. And white keeps total control. Black is lost. Tomashevsky, realized all of this, of course, and decided to give up a piece. Last trick, bishop takes e7. Well, not really last trick, last attempt. That's not good enough. Bishop takes e7, rook e8. Threatening rook takes e7, and for the moment white is pinned, but he can easily unpin. He played king a1. There's just not enough play for black left in the position. a3, b takes a3, queen f5. But now the time control has been made. This is move 40. Caruana had time to calculate everything. He went for queen to c3. Remember earlier when I was talking about this h6 pawn, it always looks far-fetched, the queen getting to g7, but it can happen down the line. And here it is a key element, threatening checkmate. Tomashevsky had seen enough and resigned. Piece down, no activity, no counterplay. He would have to parry this threat by going back to f7. And white has a number of wins. Queen e5, the most simple one, just keeping the status quo and then going for f4, f5. Or the more spectacular rook takes c6, intending queen takes e7. Rook to e6. Once again, cashing in on this queen g7 checkmate theme. And black can resign. So queen c3, 1-0. Good game by Fabiano Caruana, who, had an interesting new idea up his sleeve in the opening with his g4, got the initiative, and managed to outplay Tomashevsky in the struggle that ensued. I think, the one big chance Tomashevsky missed was the c5 move in this position instead of knight d5, c5, c4. King h8, d5, and b5, and who knows what would have happened with a very, very messy game. But after that, Caruana managed to stop black from deploying all his forces and win a nice game. Let's have a look at the standings, if I manage to find them in this Grand Prix tournament. Here we are, 1 second. Yep. After 3 games played, Fabiano Caruana is now in the lead with 2 out of 3, together with Lenier Dominguez, who won a nice game yesterday, and Peter Svidler, who won a game today, beat Dmitry Yakovenko. But of course, it's only 3 rounds, there's still all to play for. Evgeny Tomashevsky only half a point behind the leaders, so anything can still happen in this tournament, and we'll keep following it. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you for the next round. Bye bye.